Welcome back team, how's it going? Today we're going to be going through every single top lane champ in the game one by one and placing them in a category based on how many games it's roughly going to take you to have a good level of mastery on the champion. Now keeping in mind this is going to be different for player to player. You might only take 100 games for a certain champion and your dad might take 400. It really just depends, but this is going to be a rough outline of how many games you should expect to commit if you want to play a champion in the long run. So to give a quick example, if you wanted to play a champ like Riven, it's probably going to be in the 500 plus category. So you know what you're getting yourself into. But a champion like Garen or a champion like Mordekaiser is going to be way lower, so you know what kind of time commitment is needed before you commit to one of these champions and try to make them your main or a champion in your champ pool. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'm going to be timestamping all the champions down below, and let's get started. Now we're going to be going through every champion one by one in alphabetical, starting things off with Aatrox. And he's going to be roughly between 150 and 250 games to build a good base level mastery on him. I'd say it balances out roughly at around 200 depending on the person. The reasoning for that, even though his early game identity reference points are quite simple, 1 to 4 are pretty weak, 5 to 9 really strong, the way you want to be playing him, really trying to explode the lane, getting ahead 5 to 9, maintaining your lead, and especially in the mid-game macro, is just not that intuitive for a lot of players. The reasoning for that 1 to 2 item spike on Aatrox, you're going to be one of the best champions in the entire game. You're going to be so powerful, but you get outscaled pretty quickly by a lot of other top lane champs. Champs like Irelia, Fiora, Gwen, Camille, all of these champs, not only can they be tricky in lane as well, so you need to have really good matchup understanding, but even if you get a slight lead, they are going to outscale you inside eventually if you don't really use your early game power to carry the game. So you need to be rocking up to objectives early with your sweeper, getting creative flanks, a lot of big skills that take a lot of time to work on. So for that reason, I'd say roughly between 200 and 250 games until you see good results on this champion. Now as for Akali, even though I only recommend her as a counterpick top lane champ, I'd still say to have good results on her, you need between 150 and 250. A little bit lower if you're only using her as a counter pick. If you only use her in that way, maybe around 150, just learn the matchups like Jax or Camille, you know, anything you want to counter, then maybe between 100 and 150, but I'd say as a champion in your pool, not just as a niche counter pick, 150 to 250 is going to be the sweet spot. The reasoning for that, her lane phase can be extremely oppressive, but you need to be really good at spacing the max range of your Q, spacing your auto, stuff like that, playing around your cooldowns quite well, and in team fights as well, you're really squishy, do a ton of damage, so you have to have really good ability usage, and that's going to take a bit of time to build that skirmishing and team fighting knowledge. But again, if you only use her as a counter pick into free low matchups, it'll be a lot less. Moving on to Akshan, and this one's quite hard for me to place. It's anywhere between 250 and 300, I would say, but I'm going to keep him at 250 for now. My reasoning for this is if you're already good at that range top lane style, how to play lane and wave control on a range top, the Akshan specific champ mastery is not as important. It doesn't going to take that much time to get as good at the champion as other range tops would, so I'll keep him around 250 for now. The only reason I hesitated is if you have no experience playing range tops, you're not that good at it, it will take you around 300 plus games, but that's not really Akshan specific, that's just learning the class of champion. Now, moving on to Ambessa. This one also a bit difficult to place for a different reason. To get a good base level on her and have success, I would say it's around 100 games. This champion, I would say, is easy to play, very difficult to master. So I want to put her at 300 plus, just to really build that mastery on her. My reasoning for this is if you want to commit to Ambessa, don't be satisfied with just being good at her. The big difference between a great Ambessa player and the average one is spacing. Every single one of Ambessa's abilities is a range ability. It's got some range to it. Her passive auto has range as well. You can space the majority of top lane champs in lane, do so much damage to them without taking any damage in response. It's such a hard skill to master because you're hopping in between it. You need to know when to do short hops, medium hops, what distance to hop to. All those little intricate details take a lot of time to build mastery on. And that's why I want to keep her at 300 plus for now, even though because the champion is a little bit busted at the moment, you would have decent success at 100 compared to other champions, but I'd say in general, especially in the future, she's probably going to get nerfed. 300 plus to build a good champ mastery level foundation on her. Next up we have Aurora, and I'm actually going to pair Aurora and Kennen together in the 250 column. Similar to Akshan though, if you don't have good experience playing range top laners, it's going to take you 300 plus, probably between 400 and 500, but if you already do, then building great champ mastery on them anywhere between 150 and 200. The reasoning for that, the way these champions play in lane is very similar to a lot of other range top laners, and especially these two together. Their mid-game identity is pretty much the same. Neutralize wave, look for a play, creative flanks with sweeper, things of that nature, and their lane phase is just so powerful that there's not a lot of matchups that are difficult for you. Now, you do have to have good champ mastery for that to be the case, so I'd say around 200-250 games, you should be winning lane consistently on these champions, and understand your role in the mid-game quite clearly. Moving on to my girl Camille, and it does pay me to put her a little bit low, but I'm going to put her in the 150 column. The reasoning for that, even though the mechanics can be quite tricky at times, there are a lot of patterns that you can fall back to on this champion. 1 to 5, quite strong in a lot of matchups. 6 to 9, chill till Triforce. Triforce play aggressive. That pattern's going to be very consistent in a lot of matchups. Your 1 to 5 is very powerful, and if you understand when to take Grass, when to take Conqueror, how to use these runes, you're going to have a lot of success in the majority of your games, but that is going to take some experience. But once you understand how to play a Conqueror matchup, you pretty much understand how to play them all. Big aggressive level 1 trade, try to get QE level 2, you know, things of that nature. And also another factor, why I've got her so low, my Camille guide. That's going to speed up your journey a lot. If that guide wasn't out, maybe I'd put her up here, but I'll be keeping her in 150 for now. The way you play the mid game, the team fights, and of course a lot of your different matchups is not going to be that different from game to game compared to different champions. The matchup understanding can be tricky at times, but again, a lot of patterns that you can fall back to give you success in a lot of them. Now, as for Cassiopeia, I'm actually going to put her straight at 500 plus, so our first 500 plus champion. The reasoning for this, I've played in pretty much every major region, and it's only in Korea, like 2 or 3 players that I versus champion, and I think, okay, this is genuinely an OP champion that has no counters. Other than those 3 or 2 players, it just doesn't exist. This champion is so hard to play. There is such a big difference between a Cassiopeia that hits all their Qs, has really good spacing, understands their limits, knows when they can just flash on you and dive you under tower from full HP with ulti poo, keeping you stuck on the wall. Just so annoying to play up against. If they have really good spacing and Q accuracy, there's not many top lane champs that can deal with it, but building that would take over 500 games easily. Being able to hit your Qs consistently, predicting their jukes, stuff like that, respecting ganks the whole time, is going to be quite hard. I'd say Cassiopeia out of lane is probably one of the easier champs, but the lane phase is going to take you over 500 games to build that level on, probably longer. Now, moving on to Cho'gath. Chogs, I would put it around 100 games. I think before I'd put him down here, but because you need to understand the Halo Blade's movement speed setup, as well as the tank Cho, I'll put him at 100 for now. I'd say he gets quite easy with the movement speed build. You can just neutralize a lot of matchups. The way you play teamfights is quite simple. You don't really have to put yourself in that much danger, and the mechanics aren't that tricky either. Now, for Darius, I'm close actually to putting him in 500, to be honest, but I'm going to keep him in 300 plus for now. Just keep in mind this is a high 300, like 400, 450, something like that. The reasoning for that is, I'll order them all left to right at the end, by the way, but the reasoning for this is because Darius is a champion that's easy to play at a base level, but very, very hard to master. You would probably not be surprised how many Darius players and students I've seen complain, what do you do if you're playing Darius into a range top or a range comp? I feel completely useless all the time. But the top level Darius players, they don't care if they're versing Kennen, Aurora, Jayce, Illaoi, all these really annoying champs, they still get a lot of value on them. Of course, if they verse a heavy melee comp, they're going to get tons of value, but this is a champion that's an amazing blind pick, but you need the champion mastery in terms of your matchup knowledge. You really need to understand how to play every single matchup you come into, and there are some patterns you can fall back to for the easy matchups, but most of it's difficult or counter ones. You need to play very different, so it can be quite tricky to build that experience up. You need a quite high amount of games. Now for Dr.Mundo, I'm actually just going to put him in 20 to 50. It might be on the lower end of this. The reasoning for that, his reference points are very, very simple. You play quite conservative in the early game, taking short trades only. When you've got your warmogs, you start headbutting the tower in front of them and ignoring them, and you try to collect tier 2s in the side lane. Moving on to Fiora, and this one goes without saying, easily 500 plus games. The main reasons for this, to summarize, is your Q and your W usage is going to take you a ton of games to get good at. The W usage is going to be unintuitive at times. Of course, parrying something like Camille that's coming at you, very straightforward. But what about champs like Renekton, champs like Jax, where you can't really react to the stun, you have to predict it coming, anticipate it. That's going to take you so many hundreds of games to build that understanding on and have a high success rate on it. Also, the Q usage as well. You don't want to Q onto people like you're playing Jax and jump on their head. You need to be quite elegant with it. The max range of the Q, but still not in range for them to auto attack you back. You need to be able to do that consistently and hit the very edge of the vital to not overextend yourself in a lot of situations. Now, on top of the already difficult mechanics, the matchups. She has a pretty difficult spread of matchups where there's a lot of range top lane bullies. If you want to look just below her, all these champions will give you a lot of trouble. Even some tricky melee champs like Darius or tanky neutralizers can be annoying. You need to have good mastery on all of them, and they're all pretty different. She has a wide spread of counter matchups. I'm not saying it's the hardest counter, but champs like Malphite can be quite annoying. Champs like Pantheon, and then of course the AP range tops. There's a big spread of champions that do well into you, and you need to build that mastery up. That's going to take you so many games to get good at. This will be on the upper end of the 500 plus section. Next up we have the Plank, and yet another champion in the 500 plus category. Now, the main reason for that is, of course, his barrel usage. It's going to take you a lot of games, hundreds of games to be consistently good at them. Not just team fighting, the 2-part, 3-part stuff like that, but especially using them in lane. You're going to verse a bunch of different champions with different auto attack animations, attack speed, stuff like that. You need to be able to win the barrel minigame up against them consistently. And not only that, you need to be good at the mind games of it too. A lot of people walk towards the barrel, pretend to kill it, step back, stuff like that. You need to know when to hold your ground, or when they're actually going for a pop the barrel. That's going to take a lot of games to just build that experience up, kind of similar to Fiora parry as well. You just need to have a good intuitive understanding of when you need to utilize your barrel or when they're trying to fake you out, and a lot of matchups can be tricky as well. You will need to build that matchup understanding also. Moving on to Garen, 25 to 50, of course, he's just too mechanically simple. But you've probably heard me say this before, Garen's a great champion to learn top lane on. Because the champ mastery, you only need around 25 to 50 games and you should be okay for the most part. Not saying you can't get better after that, but that should be a great foundation for you. And then you start to work on your mid-game macro, your trading, team fighting, stuff like that, the non-Garen specific aspects of League. Now, as for Gnar, initially I was going to keep him at 150. I'll put him higher for one reason only. His mega management is very, very tricky. Knowing when to time it for a fight, knowing when to actually skip a wave because it's going to pop your mega when a fight's coming up. A lot of that's going to take a lot of games to build experience on. Even pro players make that mistake quite often. They do that one extra wave and then they're going to be mini for a fight. So it takes a lot of experience on the champion. But the reason I don't want to put him any higher, even though that'll take you a long time, his early game and mid game formula is very, very simple. You play nice short trades 1 to 5. You probably heard in the Gnar guide if you watched it. Get tier 2 boots first recall. And then you start to win your matchup. Play aggressive on mega timing. Play respectful when you're freshly exhausted or short mega bar, stuff like that. A lot of those patterns are going to be replicable in pretty much every single game that you play. The hard part is going to be that mega management and how that interacts with the rest of your team. Now, as for Gragas, I would say he's 300 plus easily. The reason for that, he's one of the easiest champs in the game to play at a base level, but to really build that great champ mastery, to have success on him, and not just play 50 games and counterpick a Jax and make him sad, to actually be a really good Gragas player, that's going to take between 400 and 450 games, I would say. This champion you need to be really good at spacing, playing around your cooldowns, understanding your opponent's cooldowns to know if your E will be up when they re-engage you, stuff like that. It's going to take a lot of time, but even skirmishing and team fighting has such a high skill ceiling on this champ. Your ulti can completely 1v9 or completely grief at team fight, depending on how you use it, and especially being able to weave in and out the fight. This is going to take you a lot of time. You'll probably watch good Gragas players make the champ look really broken and smooth, just constantly weaving in and out, knocking up everyone tons of damage, and then you verse the Gragas player that just picks it as a counter pick, and they're a complete shit stain. It definitely takes a lot of games to build that mastery up. Now, for Gwen, I would say 100 games is going to be fine for you to build that champ mastery on. Reason for that, her mechanics are quite simple. The main thing you're going to want to learn is, of course, the spacing in lane with your Q and your E extra range, stuff like that, and your W usage, knowing when you need to use it. Especially up against melee champions, it's unintuitive when to use W, where you want to WQE, sit at the edge of it so they can't hit you back. Where a lot of people just see Gwen W as I'm about to get hit by a skill shot, I will use it. That's going to take between 100 and maybe even 150 games to build. I'll put her in 150 for now. The reason I'm going to promote her actually, on second thought, is just because there are a lot of matchups that you need to be really good at that are quite brutal. Champions like Renekton, Riv, and Pantheon, it's a lot easier for them than for you in the lane, but they are doable if you have great champ mastery, so I'd say 150 is going to be good, just to learn that matchup spread and your W usage. Now for Illaoi, I'll give her about 100. Reason for that, I'd say the way you play out your formula on Illaoi is pretty much the same every game. So it's not going to take you too much experience on her. Quite mechanically simple as well. You just need to have good skill shot accuracy, and the hard part will be understanding your limits. But let's be honest, most Illaois don't know their limits. If you dive onto it, you're probably going to die if she has ulti. But of course, if after 100 games, I should say you'd have a rough idea of when you can 1v2, when you can't, stuff like that. Maybe between 100 and 120, but we'll keep her in 100 for now. Next up, we have Irelia, and no surprises there, straight to the 500 plus category. She's easily one of the hardest champions mechanically in the game, but not just in lane, I would say out of lane. To get the maximum amount of value on your champion in a team fight or a skirmish is very, very difficult, especially a team fight. It's kind of awkward to flank, as your champion's really easy to get engaged on, you don't have any escape tool, and even if front to back you're not that useful. It's very tricky to pick your moment when to go in, stuff like that. So I think this champion's execution, not just in lane, requires really high level of excellence. I don't want to put any Irelia players down, but she's kind of the Nidalee of top lane, where if you're just a normal player, you're probably going to grief the team and your team comp, but if you're insane, you can completely take over a game and explode the early game consistently. Moving on to Jax, and I'm actually going to put him in the upper end of 150 to 250, or rearrange at the end, and that may surprise a lot of you, as his ability abilities are quite simple mechanically. The reason why he's going to be so high up, I'd say 250, maybe even 300, is just because his matchup spread is one of the more difficult out of all champions. There are a lot of patterns on Jax that is not intuitive. You need to play a lot of games to know when to do each one. For example, in some matchups you can just Q onto their head, beat them down. Sometimes you need to lead with movement, use your E, then Q follow. Some matchups you need to E straight away, like versus Volibear or a Kennen, and sometimes you need to hold on to it, keep fighting them and use it at the back end, like versus an Irelia. A lot of unintuitive ways to use your abilities, where, let's just say an easy example, a champ like Warwick or a champ like Mordekaiser, you have patterns that you can follow that work most of the time. Jax, you really need to know when to change up and use each pattern for the specific situation, not just matchup dependent as well. It might change in the matchup depending on item spikes, HP, and that's just going to take 250 to 300 games to build that experience on. I am planning to remake the Jax guide though, so maybe that's going to be 150 in the future. That's going to speed up your journey for you. And as for Jayce, easily 300 plus games. Even though this meta makes him easier to play at a base level, because the Grasp and the Shojin build, way easier than the full damage Jayce in the past, to get the most out of that page and really dominate your lane with that extra power, you need to be very, very proficient on the champion. Here's a roughly tricky matchup spread. He's a great blind pick, but you need to understand how to play a lot of your matchups. Even though in the past champs like Malphite or Gragas could be unplayable, now they're actually Jayce favored if you play them extremely well. It's just going to take you a lot of games to get the hang of, dominating your lane while balancing surviving ganks at the same time. Now for Karma, complete opposite, one of the easiest champs in the game. You can just push, poke your opponent under tower, get good wards down and just easily survive. If they all in you, RW, can't die, and hope you get carried if you play her. I'd say around 30-35 games would be enough on this champion easily. Now for Kayle, I'd say upper end of 25 to 50. I don't want to put her any higher just because her reference points are very straightforward. You know exactly what you're signing up for when you pick Kayle, and that's not really going to change depending on matchup. Yes, you can play more aggressive in certain matchups, and especially at level 6, you can actually dominate a lot of them. But I'd say this champion mechanically is very, very simple, and your game plan and your champ identity is very clear to understand. Now for Kled, I would actually put him at 300 plus. I think this is a very, very tough champion at the moment. For a long time, he's been a champion that only one-tricks can really play for a good reason. You need to have a really good understanding of your matchups. He also has a very difficult matchup spread. Champions like Ken and Gnar can be annoying for him, and melee champions like Jax can be tricky, Fiora really hard. So there's a lot of different classes and playstyles of champions that you're going to have to learn the matchups for, but this champion snowballs extremely well, so if you can get very good at those matchups and get leads, you can carry consistently, but it's going to take you a long, long time to even learn the limits of your champion, let alone learn all the matchups. Now for Cassante, I'd say 300 plus as well. That may surprise some people. I think this champion is easy to play, hard to master, which is why I'll put him at 300 plus. A bad Cassante player is pretty much a free lane. You can just farm for free, and later on you just outscale them inside most of the time in terms of your usefulness in the game if you're playing a carry champ. But a great Cassante player is really, really oppressive in lane. It's really hard to get any type of advantage against him, and he's just going to poke you down lower and lower, and he's really broken in skirmishes as well if he can play them very well. So I'd say lower end of 300 plus. Now for Malphite, of course, 25 to 50. Your identity is very simple. You should only pick him in good Malphite games, so you're going to be valuable regardless. And of course, mechanically, very, very easy. And as for Maokai, very, very simple mechanically, 25 to 50 as well. Team fighting, very straightforward. Mid-game macro, just kill a wave and group up with your team. No real difficulties here. Some matchups can be quite tricky, but you should only really pick Maokai in good situations anyway. Now for Mordekaiser, I would say upper end. I want to put him at 75. Unfortunately, I don't really have a category for that. Maybe we'll make one just for him. Let's do it. So add a row above, just to be a little bit annoying, 75, and put him in there. Reason for that, I'd say 50 games is just not quite enough, because he's a champion that's great at short trading and long trading, so it's not quite intuitive, right? Where let's say a champion like Garen, QE, disengage, that's going to be your trade most of the time, or QE, chase him down and ult them. There's not that many variables compared to a champion like Mord, where you have great short trading tools, great long trading tools, and knowing when to do each one. Especially pre-6 can be quite difficult for some people. You can even beat down a Darius with Ignite if you have Ignite, if you fight him in your wave, if you play well, abuse your long trade, stuff like that. The short trade, long trading style is just not quite intuitive, which is why I want to put him at 75. Now for Nasus, I'd say 25 to 50. Your identity is very, very straightforward. You know exactly what you're getting into when you pick him. Some matchups can be tricky, but you're going to lose lane regardless anyway, so I'd say there's not that many variables that you're going to run into. Now for Olaf, it's either 100 or 150. I'm going to say 150 after the mana nerfs. Just mana management on top of this champion as well. Knowing how to survive ganks, knowing when you can 1v2. It's going to take you a bit of time. He's also quite good at that proxy style. which takes people a lot of time to get the hang of. So I'd say 150 games is a sweet spot for him. 100 you would be fine at him as a base level. 150 is when you'd start to see good results, I would say. Now for Ornn, I'd say 150 as well, maybe 100. I'll give him 150. I feel like being able to execute the Ornn combos consistently and being good at trading in lane, spacing your opponent, stuff like that can be quite a good skill set to build on. But mid game and team fighting, very, very simple on him. I'm actually going to demote him to 100 for that reason. Now for Pantheon, 150 to 250, I'll say 150. Upper end of 150. My reasoning for that, the hard part that makes me want to put him here is your ulti usage. Knowing when it's actually good to just sack your lane and ulti bottom, when it's a good kill mid, or when you're just wasting ulti and they're just going to flash away, stuff like that. It's quite a hard skill to get the hang of. Okay, say upper end at 150 for now, as you're just so strong in lane, and his abilities are very simple, very easy mechanically. But of course, there's a massive difference between a good Pantheon and a bad one. I would just say for a player that commits 150 high-intensity games of Pantheon with reviews, and knowing what they're trying to practice, you're probably going to see good results after 150. It's not going to take you as long as the champions above him. Now for Poppy, I would actually put her at 250, surprisingly. Again, to play Poppy decently well, 20 games you'll be chilling. To really be good at Poppy and get the most out of her, especially in lane, 200 to 250. She's pretty much a range champion trapped in a melee champion's body, where a lot of your abilities have range, so you can poke it down your opponent, space them, and you have to have really good movement to play this champion well, which can be quite unintuitive for a lot of players, especially below Masters. So I'd say 250 games would be good, as long as you're putting a lot of focus on really min-maxing your laning phase. Now for Quinn, similar to the other range tops, I'll just put her in here. Same reasoning as Akshan, stuff like that. The champ mastery on Quinn, her mechanics, not really that difficult, but playing a range top lane at top is going to take you a lot of games to get the hang of it. Now for Renekton, I'll put him at 150. Fury management can be tricky, but once you've got that down, his mechanics are very simple, right? A dash, AoE chop, a stun, a point click stun. It's pretty simple mechanically. You just need to be good at that Fury management. The reason I have him at 150 and not 100, even though mechanically it should be probably 75, is just because on Renekton you need to be very good at pushing the pace of the game. We talked a little bit about it in the Aatrox section, but during that 1-2 item spike, you are Thanos. You're so strong in the game, but you're going to get outscaled by pretty much any mid AD carry champion and a lot of top laners, so you need to be very, very good at pushing that pace of the game, rocking up to the objective, really commanding your team. It's a big reason why I don't actually recommend Renekton for a lot of players below Emerald. He is quite a fun champion, quite strong in lane, but actually carrying and closing out a game on him for a silver or for a gold player can be a lot more difficult than doing it on a champion that scales a lot better and has more side laning opportunities. Now for Rengar. Okay, so this might actually be my hardest champion in the entire list. I'm going to put him high end of 500 plus. Again, I'll rearrange it at the end. The reason for this champion just requires so many games to be good at. The only good Rengar players I've versed are in Korea, and when I check their accounts, they have over 10,000 games. I'm not exaggerating. They play normally 1,000 games a season for like 10 years. It is completely mental. Now, if you do get to that point, your champ mastery is going to be so high. This champion is completely insane in lane, really powerful. It's kind of hard to put into words why you need so many games on him. You just need to really know the limitations of this champion, be very fluid mechanically, and great matchup understanding as well. A lot of matchups play quite differently, and really to get the most out of this champion, it's going to take easily 1,000 games plus. But of course, I'm just going to have 500 plus as the maximum, keep it simple, but I'll put him at the very, very top. Now for Riven, another champion in the 500 plus category. Her mechanics and her combos are going to take you hundreds and hundreds of games to be able to execute them consistently and knowing when to do each one. Also, her matchup spread, she is quite powerful in lane, but there are a lot of matchup classes that are quite annoying. A good Kennen player is going to be really brutal, and Quinn and Poppy, a lot of these neutralizing range champs can be quite annoying, and even certain melee champs like Renekton that can just stat check meatball you can be tricky as well, and you need to be good at that proxy style also, which does take a lot of games to build, so easily over 500 for Riven. Now for Set, I would say 75 is a good one as well. 50 to 75, I'll put him in here for now. Reasoning for that, I'd say this champion, all of its abilities are very simple mechanically. All you need to know is about the EW, how to use your ulti well, either you're flanking, scooping someone in, or scooping a big tank onto the backline. I'd say the way you execute the champ in the mid game and team fights is quite easy. But there are going to be some really tricky matchups that you're going to have to practice. If you verse a pretty decent Gnar, Kennen, or any champion up here player, it's going to be very, very hard for you at first. So let's say you have 50 games of Set and you rock up into a Kennen, you're probably not going to be as experienced. 75, 80 games, you should be more okay. So I'd say that is going to be a good number for him. Now, for Shen, this one's very hard to place. I'm going to put him at 100. It's going to be hard for me to put him here. The top Shen players, right, that have thousands of games like Shen Ding Help, of course, they are built different. But I feel like if after 100 games of Shen, as long as you're watching educational content, you have good understanding of his ulti, his mechanics are so very simple, and his role in the game is very easy as well. Of course, there's a big difference between a good set Shen player and a Shen master, but I just can't justify putting him at the same level as here. The matchup spread is a lot more simple, the mechanics are a lot more simple, and just your role in the game overall is very, very clear cut. Now for Shyvana, I actually had a category made here before for it. I'm going to put it back in. I want it to be in the 0 games category. I think this is one of the easiest champs in the game. I'm just going to put 0 games and put her in, make her grade. The reason for that, she just has the easiest mechanics in the game, and this champion is just so terrible in top lane, you don't really have that many options. Realistically, if you're actually a Shyvana player, let's just say 20 games would be fine, but I want to keep her in 0 games to scare people away from her. Next up we have Singed, and I'm actually going to put him at around 200 games played. It is quite hard to place him. I was tempted to put him higher, but the reason I demoted him from 300 initially is just because his mechanics are very, very simple. All of his abilities are extremely easy to use. His team fighting, his mid-game macro, all extremely simple. Even his early game most of the time, it's going to be a pattern that you follow. The 2 main difficulties of Singe, that's going to take you around 200-250 games to get the hang of it if you focus on it, is your spacing. With the really good Singe players, it's really awkward to hit them. Their movement is really good relative to their poison. They play in a way where if you try to click onto them, you're going to run through poison all the time. But once you get the hang of the movement pattern, you're going to be fine in a lot of situations, and a lot of matchups play quite similarly. And the second difficulty is the proxying. So once you understand when it's good to proxy, when not to, what matchups you need a level 1 proxy and stuff like that, you're going to be fine. And a lot of that stuff you can learn from watching VODs, applying it to your game. It's more of a knowledge-based champion than anything mechanical that you need a bunch of reps on. But the spacing aspect is going to take you a lot of practice, so I'd say 200 to 250 games is going to be the sweet spot. Moving on to Sion. Now initially I was going to put him quite low on this tier list, but I'm going to promote him up to 100 games. The reason for that initially is going to be low, because he's mechanically simple, his team fighting and mid-game all very straightforward, but the reason I want to put him higher is just because spacing people in lane with your 3 range abilities is a skill you're going to have to practice and get quite good at. Also being able to utilize Fog of War to get high value Qs, stuff like that, another skill set as well, but I'd say that one is quite easy to pick up if you're thinking about it and aiming to do it. The spacing aspect in lane is going to take you a bit more time. Now for Silas, I'd actually just say 100 games as well. I think this champion is underrated in terms of how simple he is to play. His abilities are all very, very straightforward. He just looks really flashy, so it looks harder than it actually is. Now for top lane, you should probably only use him as a counter pick. I do think he's underrated as a top laner in general, but I'd say in terms of building a good foundation to be able to pick him in the right game into like a Malphite, Maokai, whatever you want to play him into, 100 games is going to be more than enough. Now for Tahm Kench, I'll say 75 games as well. Extremely simple mechanically. Your role in the game is very straightforward, but really getting the most out of your laning phase and gaining advantages consistently, which is important on Tahm because you're not really that useful out of lane, is going to be a skill that you're going to have to practice and just a bit more difficult than the champions below him. Now for Teemo, really similar to up here, I actually should have categorized them together. If you can play one of these champions well, you can probably play them all well. They're pretty straightforward. I'd say Kennen and Aurora more similar together in terms of mid-game identity as well, but Teemo's mechanics are very straightforward. The shroom placement you're going to have to practice, but if you watch a few Teemo VODs of high-ranked players, maybe there's some Teemo content out there and you get a rough understanding of good shroom placement, stuff like that, you're going to be more than fine. The main issue is spacing people in lane, playing out your various different matchups, like a range sharp laner like a Kennen or a Vlad, you're going to play way different up against them compared to a melee, so once you got the hang of that, you should be fine. So I'd say around 250 games should be fine on Teemo at a good base level. Now for Trundle, 25 to 50 easily, one of the easiest mechanical champs in the game, and the easiest mid-game identity out of all of these champions for sure. Just run down side lane, break down towers, make people answer you, and even if you go down swinging, it's probably going to be worth it a lot of the time, as long as you take a champion or two with you, or maybe even the tier 2. Now for Tryndamere, I'd say around 150 is fine. I want to put him low, but I'll keep him at 150. I think his identity now is just straight so simple. Grasp with Ravenous Hydra, but I have this the best Tryndamere player in Korea quite a few times recently, and he really shows me the agency this champion can have in lane, how oppressive it can be in the right hands. So definitely if you practice the abusing sustain version of him, where the most OP thing about this champion is his infinite sustain. So if you can extend the matchup and put the wave in an uncomfortable position where your opponent doesn't really have the mana or the resources needed to get the wave in, it can be very tricky for them to do so. And because your champion has such crazy sustain and good trading tools, you can do that consistently if you get the hang of it. But I'd say around 150 games, mid-game identity very simple, mechanics very simple as well. Now for Udyr, probably 150 as well, maybe 100. The reason I'm going to put him 150, even though his mechanics are also easy, the way you want to be pushing the pace of the early game is going to take a few games to get the hang of, more than a few. The reason for that, Udyr is a champion that is one of the strongest in the early game, and probably one of the worst scaling champions on this tier list. So you need to be very, very good at that hit tower in front of people, proxy, run into the jungle and beat them up type of style, communicate to your jungler to play for grubs, get involved, stuff like that. That's just not intuitive for a lot of players. It's going to take you a lot of games, but in terms of a champ mastery level, 100 to 150, more than enough. Now for Urgot, I would say 150 as well. Reason for that, compared to these other bruises, even though again his mechanics are quite simple, he's a range top laner, so you need to be better at abusing your range. His level 1 is really, really powerful compared to a lot of the champions below him, so you need to abuse that as well. And his mid game is kind of unclear. You can side lane, you can teamfight decently well, but you're quite vulnerable and easy to kill inside, and your teamfighting is not amazing by any means compared to a lot of these champions. So I'd say in terms of how to execute and win a game on him consistently, it's going to take you a bit more time than most of the bruisers below him. Now for Vayne, I'm going to put her up on the list with the other range tops. You can kind of see the pattern by now. A lot of these champions are actually quite simple mechanically. The hard part is actually abusing the range versus melee matchups or range versus range matchups in lane and getting the most amount of value out of them. But in terms of their kit, a knockback, a tumble, it's quite straightforward, right? The main issue is your spacing, your ability to play range top lane as well, and that's not really going to be Vayne champ mastery specific either. Now for Vladimir, again, you're going to get sick of it by now. Actually, I'll put him at 150. I think he's way easier than these champions for the reason of his sustain is just unbeatable. No mana champs with consistent healing abilities are just broken in lane. Champs like Tryndamere, champs like Vladimir, they are just so hard to deal with in lane, and Vlad doesn't really have that many unplayable matchups by any means, and the mechanics are very simple on this champ as well. So I'm going to put him a lot lower than these other champions that are more punishing if you make mistakes on. Moving on to Volibear, and I'm going to put him in the 75 category. His mechanics are really straightforward, his combo is just so simple, and there's not really that much variance to him. The hard part is going to be playing into range matchups or range comps, but if you do the Cosmic Drive 4 points Q build, you're going to be more than fine. Now for Warwick, I was close to putting him 300 plus because I've been scarred by the rank 1 Warwick player in Korea, the best one trick I've ever versed, but I'm going to put him down a little bit. I feel like the game plan for this champion is very replicable. You can do the same thing in pretty much any matchup that you play. Of course, there are going to be differences for any champion, but I'd say the pattern that you can build on this champion is going to work for you more often than not. The main learning curve is going to be understanding your limits to a really good level, but after 250 games, you should be more than fine at that. Now for Rumble, I would say 300 games plus. This champion, I'm close to putting him down here. The main difference is he's a melee champion technically, and he has strong all-in with overheat, so knowing when to utilize that. And the mid-game is a bit trickier for him as well. You need to be really good at pushing the pace of the game, where champs like Aurora or Kennen, it's very clear. You push it, you neutralize a wave, you rock up to a fight, big flank, the Smeb ulti, and just carry the fight very easily. Where Rumble, of course you can do something similar, but the way you execute it's a little bit more tricky. It's not as game-changing of an ulti. You might need to chain see it off your team. You might need to wait for the choke opportunities, and of course the ulti placement, way harder on Rumble than it is for these champions. And also the lane spacing is going to be a bit more tricky as well, as he is shorter range in them, and getting a lot of value from Q and heat management as well. Really unintuitive skill to practice. Now for Wukong, I'll say 75 games as well. Very mechanically simple. The reason he's higher than 50 is just because there are a lot of matchups that can be very brutal for you, especially AP tanky champions like Mordekaiser, champs like Maokai, Malphite. Maokai not too bad, but it's still a little bit annoying. That can be quite tricky for you, so you should only really pick Wukong as a counter pick in my opinion. Now for Yasuo, Yasuo is a tough one to place. I'll say 300 games. I think this champion is just really hard to play mechanically, in top lane especially, and you have to have really good matchup mastery. If you only use it as a counter pick to like Gnar or something like that, sure, you can put him lower, but in terms of being a Yasuo player, I'd say you need to understand how to play into a lot of these unplayable matchups like Cassiopeia, Darius, stuff like that. Even Ambessa would probably be pretty brutal, so you definitely need to have really high mastery on him to get through the matchups in terms of that matchup mastery. Now for Yone, I'd say 300 as well. Pretty similar to Yasuo, I'd say he's a little bit easier. in terms of the matchup spread, but the options you have on him are a lot higher. You have more options. Team fighting on him is going to be way trickier than Yasuo as well, because you have more options. You kind of have to hold yourself back a bit at times, know when you can start the fight, know when you can chain CC. I'd say that's unintuitive, and during that mid-game macro portion, where it's kind of awkward to hit tier 2, stuff like that, and you want to power farm, but still join the fights if they look good, I'd say that's going to be not as clear on a Yone as it is on other champions. Now, for Yorick, I would say around 100 games is fine, maybe 150. I'll keep him in 100 for now. Reason for that, your goal in the game, mid-game macro, all that stuff, very, very simple. The way you play your lane is straightforward as well. Go fishing for ease. Of course, you need to have good E placement, good cage placement, but I'd say after 100 games, maybe 120, 125, you should be more than fine. And as for Zac, I'd say 150 to 250. I'm close to putting him 300 because of the really good Zac players, but I'd say 250 should be more than enough. He's quite simple mechanically, but he's very, very broken in lane if you can get the most out of this champion. You might have heard me talk about it before, champs like Vlad or Tryndamere, no mana champions with high HP sustain are quite broken in lane. You can extend the lane for a long time, even losing health trades are better for you, so you need to be very, very aggressive and really pushing the limits of this champion to get value out of it. But of course, if you do it wrong and you just get blobbed and die, you're going to be quite useless, so it's important for you to really understand the limits of your laning. But team fighting, all that stuff, very easy on this champion, which is why I won't put him on 300 plus. Alright team, that's it for now, and as you can see here, I've rearranged the entire list from left to right in regards to most amount of games needed to the least. So Rengar would be the champion in top lane that does require the biggest time commitment, and Shyvana would require the least, so everything is as it should be. And just a quick reminder, the point of this list is not the same. After 150 Urgot games, you're going to be completely mastered on the champion, and make no mistakes, nothing like that. It just means if you play this amount of games as a rough outline, depending on the person, you should have high enough champ mastery that you will be comfortable in the majority of games that you play, and then you can focus on improving in other aspects. So for Garen, after 50 games, you can focus on the fundamental parts of the game, but for a champion like Jayce, you're going to have to spend 300 to 500 games really just building that champ mastery. So when you're picking a champion that you want to learn, this list can be a good rough outline for how much time you're going to have to commit if you want to see good results on them.